Hey everybody, so I'm joined by Ryan Summers, who is a fantastic creative director with years of experience doing 3D animation, leading teams, and so forth. Honestly, Ryan, you've been doing this for over a decade. To say that you're a wealth of knowledge would be an understatement at this point. So I'm excited to talk to you. This is super exciting. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. It's exciting. It's what are we? Are we in the middle of the week? I can never tell anymore. Mondays feel like Fridays, Wednesdays feel like Saturdays. I'm doing good.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. So Ryan, I swooped on your LinkedIn, man. I had to. I was curious, right? I'm checking your stuff out, and I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, this guy has like done everything, like animation, 3D art direction. You worked at one point with a, correct me if I'm wrong, but VMS was a mobile gaming group, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I'm like, this is like a huge history. I would love to know just like how it all began.
It's crazy, man. Like it's funny when you say that, because it's like it took me 10 years to discover motion design, to find my home, like the industry that I feel like is like where I'm supposed to be. But I actually started as a chemical engineering student of all places, and a long time ago, what feels like a galaxy far away, I had a friend, teacher, IT guy at the college I was at, saw that I was drawing and asked me if I want to take a computer animation class. And this is like early days. This is like just past Jurassic Park, just past Toy Story, like long time ago. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, oh, I'm going to have the computer lab on Saturdays. And we're basically going to like unlock the lab, and we're going to lock ourselves in for 8 hours. And this guy basically had been like 2 weeks ahead of everybody else in the manual for 3D Max. It was 3D Studio. This was before it was 3D Studio Max, before it was actually Windows. It was DOS based. If you know what that means, like you actually literally had to go to the command line and fire it up. It was bizarre. But for me, it was just like, oh, this is like what I love. I love comic books and cartoons and video games. Now I get to play with it, which sounds ridiculous and trite now, but back then it was like kind of like a novelty. It was something that you didn't know was something you could do. So I took this class. I animated. There was a comic book character called the Max. That there was like an old school 2D cartoon. I made the Max in 3D. Everybody else was making like toasters and like physical things. I like made a character animate, and I couldn't believe it. In like 8 weeks from like nothing to do. And I'm like, I gotta find if I could do this for a living. And did some research, went to like the worst school in all of Chicago for it. I only went for 2 years. And then I got very lucky. I started working at a tiny little boutique studio that was started by a guy who used to work at the company that made VeggieTales. And he kind of stole a contract away from them. And we were making direct-to-video kids stuff, which was amazing, before streaming. So we were actually making like half-hour animated like DVDs and, VHS tapes, I think. I did that for about a year, and then that whole industry, at least around Chicago and the Midwest, bottomed out. And then I worked at WMS, where we made it technically was video games, but we made slot machines, like video slot machines, which was like at the time it was kind of new, where you could actually have a screen and physical reels, and then you could like create these bonus games with touch screens and stuff. And that was awesome because I knew 3D, but everyone else there was like 10 years older than me, and they only did 2D, like Flash, old school, like Macromedia Director style stuff. And we had just licensed a game engine, and we could take 3D stuff. So I was like elevated very quickly to being like a lead, and I got to hire people. But the cool thing was I was hiring people from Disney, because Disney had just shut down their animation studio in Florida that had done like Brother Bear and Lilo and Stitch. And I basically got like my master's degree in animation from all these like amazing 2D animators who I was like, they were struggling to learn 3D. So they're like this 24-year-old kid trying to teach them 3D. And I'm like, here's my deal. Like I will show up early. If, before we work, you teach me what I know, but what you know about 2D, and I'll just teach you what I know about 3D at lunch. So I basically like got this amazing, like kind of like history lesson, best practices, got my ass kicked in terms of like trying to get better as an animator, as a 2D animator. But I was there for like 6 years. And then eventually I moved to LA and all the other stuff that happened. But that's how I kind of like, I found motion design after all of that. And the story after that's kind of like same as everybody else's.
I love that, because I feel like, a lot of companies are like, yeah, you'll learn on the job, right? But like, you literally were like, hey, I'm learning on the job and teaching on the job. Like,
yeah, it was amazing. I couldn't believe I was like getting paid to basically like, ask all these guys like that they were very great. The cool thing about it was like, you can learn a lot about the basics of 2D animation anywhere, but like the real stuff like final line and cleanup and tracebacks and all these little tricks that like, unless you paid for one of the 2 or 3 like most expensive schools in the world, you wouldn't get access to all of that those little things, those little like that all stack up that are like, oh, that's how they did it. Like that they were able to make that stuff. I feel like I have a really high sensitivity to posing timing and spacing when it comes to like kinetic type or shape layer animation, that I love working with like young animators in After Effects or C4D that maybe haven't touched that or haven't had that kind of like character animation based experience, because it applies to anything, right? Like if you can take a box and actually bring it to life and give it a little bit of personality, or like what we're now finding is something that's very very desired from like tech companies and brands that have spent thousands. I'm sure you've seen these, like tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of dollars on like branding books for design. Like you get this 300-page PDF that's all about the fonts and the color combinations and how big things have to be with like the logo based on like a billboard versus like a cell phone. There's almost nothing about motion. But the keys to kind of like do motion branding for a company all are based in those like fundamentals of character animation, like and make something feel smooth, make it slick, make it playful, make it feel trustworthy. It's all character, even if it's your type or your shapes. So I found that all of that knowledge, even if you aren't doing fully limbed characters doing performances, it still comes into play so much when you're talking about like motion with basic components. It's a very cool time.
And I think that's really interesting, talking about how like motion is so based in animations that even with like type, because even like basic type books, even nowadays, I feel like they don't tell you how it works in motion. It's all about static. It's all about, here's the history of it, so forth. And you're like, that's great. But, let's say I take a font that's super thin, right? Works good on a graphic. I throw it into a video. You got like 3 seconds to see the text, and now it's a busy background too. And you're just like, cool, great on paper, horrible on execution.
Exactly. Yeah, and then when you're trying to like express the you think about this, right? There's a lot of at our studio, we like to talk about challenger brands, right? Like there's Coke and there's Pepsi, and there's like 3,000 like little startups all selling like their drinks, their soda, their sports energy drinks, like direct to customers, like through like Amazon. It took me a long time to like discover it, but they're all trying to express like a specific brand to like specific types of audiences that like the way you animate it totally affects whether or not it feels authentic or real or catches their attention. And they're advertising on screens. They're not advertising on billboards. They're not advertising on like postings that are like on the side of like a bus. Like it's all screens, and your first interaction with them is through motion. And if that's not right, the font's almost not as important. The color's not as important. It's like, is this supposed to be for like sponsored by like a YouTube star that's boxing now? That brand has to move a certain way to feel real and to feel like it's speaking to the audience. And it's cool because there's no book, like you said, there's no book for this, right? There's no class you can take for this. It's all like your animation, your theory and your capabilities with animation affect whether or not this stuff works. It's like I said, like it kind of almost feels like the Wild West again with animation.
It definitely does. Even if you're doing type or something like that, you're putting in emotion, something like that. I still think even doing things like the just taking a ball in After Effects, animating it, just basic bounces, stuff like that. I mean, it can really help you with timing and everything. You just translate that over to text depending on what you're doing and where it makes sense. So it's really cool stuff. So over the years, I'm sure you've worked with like so many different teams and so forth. When you're building a team, what do you look for? Like, what is like, this is it. This is the checklist.
Man, I love that you're asking this because I do open office hours, and I just did, I think 3 or 4 back to back before we talked. And 2 of them were literally that question, like, how do I get on your radar? Like, how would you hire me? Like, what would I have to do for you to remember me? And I always go to, like, obviously there's like a base level minimum of what you should be able to do, right? There's design fundamentals you should understand, all the animation kind of principles, timing, posing, spacing. You should be able to demonstrate that. For me, the thing that's the biggest thing, I always say this, like I watch tons of demo reels. Demo reels are about 3 things for anybody who's looking to hire you. Like, is it specific and do you do it as quickly as possible? Like, don't make a 2.5 minute long demo reel. Can you tell me about yourself in 30 seconds? Is it like, so brief? Is it specific? Like, tell me who you are. Like, are you a generalist? Well, what makes you special as a generalist? Like, what are your focus? What's your interest? What are your obsessions? Like, do you love Pokemon? I should know that. Like, do you love type? Well, then I could see some amazing animated type, but you should tell me that story as quickly as possible. And then is it memorable? Like, is there something under a reel that cuts through the 442 reels I have to watch in a week when I'm looking at hiring somebody? And a lot of that, the answer to that, it comes from like, I want to know your voice. I want to know your vision. I want to know your obsessions. So like, what do you think about motion design? Do you think it should always be like this or like that? Where do you want to see motion design go? Like, what are your goals or your aspirations? I don't want to just see a collection of work that's been assigned to you. Like, that's part of a reel or part of what you do. But I also want to have a sense of like, if they worked with me, what work could I get them that makes them excited, right? Like, I want to know what you're excited about. If you've never done character animation and you want to, I want to know that, right? Like, I want to somehow see that kind of demonstrated in real. And then I want to know that you're curious, right? Like, I just want to know that like you will ask questions and you will have things that you present to the team and that you will challenge things. Like, obviously, like respectfully, like you're not going to be like yelling at something stupid. But I find that like being in a team where everyone respects each other enough to question and to criticize and create a little bit of like friction sometimes, that's where like diamonds come from. That's where teams that like, once they've been around for 2 or 3 years, they don't want to work anywhere else because they're like, this is a space where I can actually like be myself. This is a space where I can actually like push myself and my team. I don't know if that answers what you're looking for, because I feel like a lot of people just want to hear like, oh, I need to see that you can do Houdini sims. But that for like a team, like where you're literally trying to find like, right now it is so hard to have a team, right? It's so expensive. Every person has to add in like a positive additive way. It's not just like, oh, this is the person that when I get a Houdini sim, I know who to send it to. It's got to be a little bit more than that. As a freelancer, might be a different story, but if you're looking to become part of a team, it's a combination of all those things. That was a lot. I don't know if that helps.
No, I think that's a fantastic insight to that. And I was talking to someone a couple of years ago about just how we're structuring the team at the age I'm with right now. And it oftentimes feels like you're building a baseball team in a way.
Oh my gosh. I love the allegory to sports, which sometimes people don't like, but it's so true.
Yeah, it's like, you could get someone might be fantastic as a hitter. They're not going to be good as a pitcher. And so you don't need like 3 different pitchers if you're building a baseball team. And so it's so interesting too that you bring up kind of the open discussion around like, challenging and things like that. I was working with a client recently where it was a hype beast brand. And one of my team members, that just falls right into the category. I'm like, cool, baseball team ice, this person needs to be on the field. This is it. This is the jam. And the guy on there and absolutely killed it. Well, that specific brand didn't really have any brand guidelines we're provided with. So we kind of had to make some stuff on our own. And I'm like, cool, we just need like a brand one sheet, something quick, just to get in, get out. So I was like, cool, here's the header font, here's the subheader, here's the body copy, like font, cool, let's rock and roll. And we started doing it, and that specific designer was like, hey, I don't think that body font's a good font. And I'm like, cool, like I really do appreciate that input, because like I feel like a lot of times it can be very scary in certain environments of like, do I approach the CD? Do I approach the AD? Do I say anything? Is it going to jeopardize my job if I do that? And I was like, cool. So I was like, I'm glad you brought that up to me. You're going to know more about this hype beast stuff than I am. Let's switch it out. Let's see if it visually and aesthetically looks good. Let's go. We did it. Looks fantastic. And I'm like, cool. Like that's what I want. I want that kind of input from my team in general, and I'll never want someone to feel like they just can't talk. So I love that. I think that's a fantastic answer on your end. Thank you. I messaged you for spicy takes on Showreels. Let's do this. You ready?
Yeah, sure. Sure. I love it.
All right. What makes or breaks a showreel at the end of the day?
If I can't remember you after I watched it, that's the number one thing that breaks. And I'd say that's like a very good percentage. I mentioned that number 442 for a reason. About a year ago, we were looking to hire 2 like junior to middle kind of generalists, like we want people who could fit into as many different jobs as possible, but we were busy enough that we're hiring so many freelancers, it made sense to bring in, 1 or 2 new people. We asked everybody in the team, hey, do you have any recommendations? Everybody had, like people that they wanted to work with or previous freelancers that we thought we might, make for good staff. But we wanted to go out and see who else was out there, right? So we posted everywhere, LinkedIn, all the job boards, asked people at School of Motion to post it. And we got, I think it was 442 reels. So I think I spent over 2 weeks. I think I watched, I do so much of these that everyone deserves at least a viewing, right? Like if you're going to take the time to do it, I know I specifically watched every one of them. And it's funny, we had 2 open positions. We ended up feeling like there were only 12 people we wanted to talk to. So I don't know what that math is, but out of 442, there were 12 that stood out enough that we're like, we should call them and see if they're the right fit. Again, these are not senior. These are not specific, like high-end, like I said, Houdini sims or somebody knows how to, an Octane rendering specialist or a photorealistic comper. It was like generalists, people who have good animation design sensibilities that know After Effects and are interested in doing C4D. So there were 12. We ended up hiring 2. And at the end of it, the 2 that were hired were people who had recommendations before we ever did the open call. Because we knew those people, we had like either a recommendation or like an affinity for them already. And they demonstrated those things. They demonstrated curiosity. They were very interested in how we worked as a team. They wanted to know where they fit in and what their career arc might be if they did become a team member, right? It wasn't just like, I'm cool and hire me, or how much money can I make? They expressed a lot of those like soft skills, but they were memorable, right? And it's not to say the other 12 people or 10 people that we talked to weren't memorable, but they fit just right. So like we even did our due diligence, right? We went out, and I can tell you, like, this is a year ago. There are probably 6 or 7 people that I still remember the demo reels. They still cut out, and we've either brought them as freelance or I've recommended them to other places. I know 1 or 2 people actually got hired at other studios based off of me introducing them to that studio and recommending them. But again, like, they were memorable because they were very specific about who they were. I felt like I got to know them immediately from their demo reel. There's this thing where I feel like there's like a show reel, which is like, I have these 3 definitions. I did a class for School of Motion called Demo Reel Dash, all about just like how to make a reel. And like, I feel like there's these 3 categories. There's a show reel, which is like, here's everything I've ever been assigned. Maybe you can hire me for one of those. Show reel. Then there's a demo reel where it's like, this is what I do. I am this. And you only show like those things that you want to get hired for in the future. You know, like maybe I've done a bunch of like animated type and I've done lower thirds and broadcast graphics, but I'm going to do character animation. I'm only going to show that. Only a character animation on my demo reel, which is different than a show reel. But then there's these things that I call narrative reels, where people weave in storytelling about themselves into the reel, where it's either like they actually film themselves talking to camera and they drop themselves into like a animated background, or they make an avatar and they animate themselves, or it's just something as simple as like kinetic type, as if I'm speaking to the actual viewer, like something that just has a personal touch that tells me a little bit more about you and what you're interested in. And it can be as simple as like, on your title card, it shows your interest. Like, I like Pokemon and I like Magic the Gathering and I love Harry Potter. And you integrate that into your demo reel. So I get just some sense of like, oh, this person really likes narrative, or I bet this person would really love character design, or like, whatever your interest might be. It lets me just remember more about you than like the jobs you've been assigned. But I would say like 90% of the reels are mostly what I would call show reels. Here's everything I've ever been assigned. I took a song, I edited it to the beat. And when there's a drop, I have a moment that lasts for a really long time. Then it goes back to being cut on the beat, and it just becomes formulaic and vanilla, and it just doesn't cut through. But yeah, I would say that's the thing. The biggest problem is being forgettable, I guess, which is kind of, it sounds harsh to say it, but it is the kind of like what you're competing against.
I think discussing, just receiving that many reels, over 400 reels, is enlightening, I think, for anybody who's getting into motion design, things like that. Just like, there are a lot of people who are in this community. It's a strange community, right? In the sense of like, it's large, but at the same time, it's funny. I was making a video a little bit earlier about it, how it's like also like a cafeteria. If you stand in the middle of the room, you do something really weird or really cool, people are going to notice. People you may not even know are going to notice, things like that, and it just ripples from there. And so it's really interesting to see how you really do have to add personality to it. I was talking to Ash Bismahan a little bit earlier, and we were talking about like you said, just putting work in versus putting personality. Yeah. And it really is just a huge make it or break it on reels. You see that personality come through, and you're just like, I get it. Even if it's something weird, it could be a weird on animation, but you're like, hey, But
it's animated well, or you have this like amazing sense of color, or there's something you did with the way the camera moved, or whatever it might be. You might just have really great timing, right? It's not applicable to the things I'm doing, but I want to tap into that. I have another thing that I think is a huge mistake, if I could share.
Yeah, go for it.
It's weird because it's not necessarily the demo reel, but it's what you do with it. I would say, like, never send your demo reel cold, if that makes sense. I talk to so many people, particularly now, which is a very tough time for freelancers and people looking for staff, because it's just like, we have this weird situation where motion design didn't do anything wrong, but we're kind of paying for the sins of all the industries we serve. Like we have nothing to do with like interest rates. We have nothing to do with inflation, nothing to do with ZERP, nothing to do with tech companies actually having to prove that they're profitable versus being focused on growth. But we're paying the price for that because it's just like temporarily right now, there's less work out there and there's more people than ever that can do it. I talked to so many people who are like, I've applied to 72 jobs on LinkedIn and I haven't heard from anyone, so I'm quitting. This industry doesn't want me. And I'm like, whoa, slow down. Like before you make that decision, can I just ask you, before you sent your reel or filled out a form, did you do any research and try to reach out to anybody at that company so that you were not sending this cold? Because if you're just one of 4,000 people applying for the job, I don't know what your chances are. But like, do you know who the hiring person is? Do you know what the department is? Like, if there's any way you can do exactly what we're doing right now, which is the easiest thing, and so many people are just desperate to talk to people. Like, did you do anything to warm up the demo reel arriving in someone's inbox? I feel like that it just means, I know it's hard to hear that because it's like, oh, there's even more work. But again, that's the battlefield you're on. Like, just doing it, like, I'm about to send my demo reel to this job. I saw that you're working there. Can I just show it to you and see what you think of it before I hit send? Something like that, over LinkedIn or over Instagram or whatever, like a message to somebody that you might know, or get a recommendation from someone, and share the reel beforehand and be like, should I take something out? Like should I not call myself a generalist? Should I say whatever, After Effects specialist? Like, those kinds of things can make or break how the reel is even received, or if it makes it to me or whoever else the person is that's making the decision. I feel like I see a lot of people making that mistake and then just getting very upset about it without like doing anything about it.
I do agree with that, especially, you know, you get a message, or even your LinkedIn message of just someone sending you a show reel, and that's it. And you're like, I appreciate getting sent this, but like, what am I doing with it? It's so interesting too, because it's such a fine balance between, it is a fine balance between being a numbers game, but also like, I feel like it helps, at least for me, to gamify it in my head, where I'm like, cool, you know, at the end of the day, I'm reaching out to 100 people. That's great. But if I'm not doing things to increase my odds of being favorable in that, in that dice roll, whatever, then like, I'm just shooting myself in the foot. I could throw out 100 demo reels or whatever, show reels, but if I'm not saying anything else with it, who cares? Whereas if I talk to people and I'm like, hey, you know, like, is this something you're interested in? Things like that, or just warming up the conversation, like you said, those chances may not always go up, but it's better to hope that they go up versus, you know, just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing these open office hours. I don't know how long. I think it's been 6 or 7 years, and I'm probably over like 1,000 or 1,100 like 15-minute like interviews or discussions, and the majority of them are about demo reels. And there's probably like a small handful, like 15 or 20 people who I've just become fans of through that process, that like, they've sent me their demo reel, they've done some work, they send it to me again a year later, they're like, hey, I'm making a new reel, can you take a look at it? And I hadn't hired them at all. And then 3 or 4 years into it, I'm like, oh my God, this is the perfect job for Taylor Cox. Can we get Taylor Cox in? Because in the back of my head, I'm already rooting for that person. I've seen them grow. I've helped them kind of shape their narrative, seen them discover new things. And I'm like, man, like, even if I can't hire them, when people come to me and they're like, who anybody that really likes video games that does like Happy Toolbox style 3D, I'm like, oh my God, Taylor Cox, let me introduce you to Taylor. You know, and then they get booked. That is, I feel like so many people feel like if their reel's not working, the first thing they do is, I got to scrub it all, make a bunch of personal projects, and make a new reel. And I feel like there's truth to that, right? Like, you should always be trying to level up. But I feel like if you could take, you know, a fraction of that amount of time and energy and putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations of trying to build relationships, that is going to pay off 10 times more than like learning the next tool and doing a tutorial that looks like everything we've seen, or taking a school motion class and making, you know, 3 more examples of the same thing we've all seen. Like, whether or not you get like good feedback or you get someone who's rooting for you, just building those relationships and creating awareness, like, it's so much more powerful than just like, I got to make another reel or a new piece. Those are great. I love that. But at the same time, like, if no one's ever seen your reel and you make new stuff, like, what does it matter? They haven't seen it before. You know, like, getting in front of more people and getting people to like be familiar with you and root for you is like a skill that we don't teach, right? There's not really like no class you can take. There's nothing you can sign up for, but it's huge. People I've seen people I've seen who've like escalated their careers and like within 3 years gone from like nobody knows who they are to like they're working at Buck or they're working on their own and have great clients. They've invested in a lot of that, like building their relationships.
It's so interesting too. When I get reels from people who are clearly like head down, like they're great at what they do, but they're super head down. And then you get into conversations, and sometimes you find that person, through that process of just being so head down, has now neglected a lot of soft skills that were necessary for even that networking side of things. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a super big thing to continue bringing this skills to the game of like, hey, you know, you gotta know how to talk to people. You gotta know how to work with them. You can't just reach out to people and sell them. That is definitely not the way to do it, but things like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same way, like if you were, you know, I hate to say it's like dating, but there is a certain amount of like, you have to build up currency before you can ask for anything, right? And like, if you are the kind of person who's just like, here's my reel, tell me if I can you hire me now? You know, that's almost as bad as not even introducing yourself, but showing like genuine interest in a studio or in a person's process or like their journey. Like, man, like, how did you get into doing this kind of work? Or, you know, like just kind of buffing people up. You can make it part of your job, right? Like, you can say like 10 hours a week, I'm going to create a spreadsheet and I'm going to target these 5 studios, and in each studio I'm going to target one of these 5 people a day. And you literally put a checkbox like, Monday, did I reply to something that they posted on LinkedIn? Did I like a couple of things on Instagram? And I've said this to many people before. It's like you're fishing, right? Like you're putting out lures and you're putting out stuff and you're just watching these 10 and you have a spreadsheet every day that you're just checking off. Oh, no response here. Try a different social media. But if you get a bite, if somebody likes something you posted or like they commented on your comment, and you're like, oh, that's a trigger now. The trigger then is like, oh, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and try to see if they'll connect with me because they've noticed me. They've seen me taking a liking to something they've done. And you don't go for the hard sell right afterwards, but like maybe then you comment on a couple more things or you send them a DM and then a week or two later, you're like, oh man, I saw this thing you did. And it's really cool. If you ever have 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I'd love to like during a lunch hour, like just like do a Zoom call with you and ask you a couple questions of what you did. And now you're on the radar and now you're on the path to building a relationship that like, you're still not asking for anything, but then that's somebody who's now seen your post because you're connected, and then that time when you post your reel, all of a sudden, like that feed will feed your stuff to them because you interact with them, you've established a connection. I feel like that can literally be part of your job. If you spend, 10 hours a week watching YouTube videos, trying to learn something, carve 2 of those hours off to dedicate towards building relationships.
It's interesting when you talk about, building a spreadsheet, things like that, because I feel like just on surface level, it's like, oh, that's like super calculating, but it's not in the sense that you want to find the people who you want to work with and you're genuinely reaching out to them for real connection. It's just such a unique dance of like being a numbers game, being genuine, things like that. And I think it always takes a little bit of practice to get there. So let's change topics a little bit though. Rive's been making a splash. How do you feel about Rive? Do you feel like do you feel like go ahead? Sorry, go for it.
I'm super excited about it. I've done a couple podcasts with the team, Guido and his brother. I've never seen a tool accelerate as fast as it has. I think it's probably the kind of development cycles and their ability to listen to the audience and kind of turn on a dime and create new features or update or change workflows is probably what we'd wish would come from every tool we work with. And I'm sure everybody has their complaints or frustrations with other tools, but like I've been super excited to see it, and it's been fun to watch them kind of go from the beginning, like, hey, this is not an After Effects replacement. Don't think of it that way. To like, then slowly kind of warm up to like, well, you can do some really cool character animation stuff in it, and then slowly into like, you can do some really great type animation in it as well. And at the truth of it, if you haven't used it, it's basically like a web-based After Effects light timeline animating tool that has really, really fast character rigging, really great mesh deformations, like something like Moho, and a lot of really smart kind of like shape layer animation tools in a very modern version of interfaces you're used to. It has things that I've been asking for forever out of things like After Effects or Flash. A very simple example is like, like you can hit F9 and you get easy ease in your keyframes and you can kind of adjust those curves. That's great. But those curves are still from like point A to point B, like from the previous curve to the next curve. What I've always wanted is to be able to like give a curve interpolation type to just a single key. So like an overshoot, right? But like curves don't reach past their next curve in like After Effects, right? But I love, you said ball bounces earlier. Like I'd love to be able to have like, okay, if I start from the top left, I go to the bottom right. When I hit the bottom right, I can have a repeating kind of bounce, but at like half percentage. So you basically in a keyframe have almost like a nested curve inside that you can have multiple other kind of like things. And then you can copy and paste that across like your whole animation. Like, oh, this ball bounce where it kind of deprecates or it kind of diminishes over the next like however many frames. You can then copy and paste that easing type or interpolation type or an overshoot, or like you can get all these like very elastic things that happen in a keyframe that you don't have to then animate 6 more keys to kind of create that. You can just say, no, this keyframe on the out, you're going to do this. That is something that's so inherently useful for animation that becomes manual labor in so many of our other tools that it's like, it's built from the ground up for people who animate and animate the way we as motion designers would want to animate. So I'm super stoked by it. And we haven't even talked about like state machines. It's basically, I'll show my age by saying it's like Macromedia Director on steroids or Flash on steroids in terms of the interactivity. Like they're constantly adding new features, but you can essentially almost create like mini games or mini websites straight in Rive. But the super cool thing is I don't know how they're doing this, but they're getting like kind of like compliance and like support from Webflow, from Framer, from I think Figma now. All these things like support Rive files. So you can embed them into websites, you can embed them into apps, you can connect them to Unreal, and create animated characters that you can then trigger different animations in Unreal based on the stuff that you do. If I had this tool back when I was doing video slot machines, I'd be like a one-person army versus like me, two other artists, and then 2 or 3 developers, like programmers who have to take my work and like put it into an engine, I don't think most people truly understood like how far-reaching it is. It's not a VFX compositing tool the way After Effects was built from the ground up to be, but it does a lot of things that you would reach for After Effects in a much more elegant and powerful way, because it's brand new. Like, it's a brand new code base. It's, you know, with people who have been working, they actually hire a lot of animators to work on staff, which I think is a huge advantage. So I don't know, that's me off my soapbox or my TED Talk for Rive, but I'm very excited about it because it puts a lot of tools into artists' hands that you would normally not have access to. To me, that's exciting because it, you know, in the motion design industry right now, everybody's like, what industry is hot? Like, should we be focusing on pharma? Should we be focusing on like concerts? Like, is TV going away? Like, everybody's talking about pre-established kind of little verticals. And then there's this whole world of like interactive that most motion design shops and artists don't know or like address because they're not a developer, because they're not a coder, because they're not a programmer. That's not to say that this obviates the need for that, but this makes the handoff to a developer much more an artist control versus like I hand you something and then I see it and then I have to change it and then I have to adjust it. It's like, no, what I give you, I have trigger points. And when a mouse clicks on it, it's going to do one of these 3 things. And you stick it in and into your code or into your game engine, and it just does it. We have not had access to that as motion designers before.
And you're absolutely right. It's so interesting. Back, I think it was like February, my spicy prediction for the motion design scene was if you're a 2D motion designer, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either one, you're going to split off and try out Rive. Or number 2, there's finally time to learn 3D. One of the 2 is going to end up happening. And it's just been so crazy to watch it grow. One of the things I really like about what they're doing is, like you said, they're getting animators, they're getting people who know motion, things like that, even just making tutorials and stuff like that. And I see Jake Bartlett post something about Rive, and I'm like, cool, like this guy's made like a whole series on effects on just YouTube about like what goes on in After Effects. I'm like, he's not going to put out something that's not going to, like, it's going to be good information. It's going to be strong information, things like that. Mm-hmm. It's so interesting. So do you think eventually it's just not going to be enough to have a show reel? Do you think people are going to have to use Rive to also like incorporate the website, and that's going to be part of it?
I would argue right now, and maybe this is avoiding your question, I would argue that I don't think it's enough to have a show reel or a demo reel right now. Like I don't think showing off facility with the tools is enough, right? Like, I think if I want to flip it another way, if you're looking for a way to be memorable, being able to demonstrate knowledge of something like Rive and show to a studio why they should want to use it, and you should be the person helping them through that. I think that's a huge advantage. I can tell you right now, like, I get calls from studios because I have not used it in a project that I can show to anybody, but I've been playing around with it a lot. And I talk about it nonstop on like Twitter and LinkedIn. The amount of studios that have hit me up and like, do you know a Rive animator is like ridiculous. Like it's comparable to 2 or 3 years ago where people were like, do you know anybody who knows Redshift, or do you know anybody who knows Houdini? But it's different kinds of studios that are reaching out and be like, I know you know something about Rive. Who's a person I can tap on shoulder to do some tests for my website to show that we know how to do it? Because they're getting hit up by clients about like, do you know how to do this interactive animation? Or like, I know we've used Lottie in the past, but it's kind of clumsy. What's this other thing? I don't think that you'll have to know Rive to be able to get work, but I think if you want to draw attention and be memorable, I think it's one of the ways to do it right now, and I think it will only increase for the next 2 years.
I'm ready to do some UI design. Yeah, Rive and Unreal. Like, I'm so pumped for that. Oh man, it's already out. I just haven't had a chance to do it. It's gonna happen. Yeah. You work with so many large clients, even just through Spillt alone, which is very interesting to see stuff like HTV, Dream Home on there, because we work with a client who their name is Belgard. They do like the pavers and stuff like that for those dream homes typically. It's funny. This like cool, passively we're somehow still connected in our work, right? yeah,
exactly. I mean, I feel like almost every motion designer somehow has like worked with someone that's worked with someone. It's like 2 degrees of Kevin Bacon for almost everybody in the industry.
Right. It really is. It's it's hilarious. Just throw the web out there and you're like, I did work with that person. I mean, I didn't see him, but I worked with them.
Yeah. Our work's somehow connected. Almost everybody has that. Yeah.
When you're talking to these kind of clients, I don't know about you, but I feel like a lot of times budget tends to come up pretty quickly in the conversation. How do you handle those kind of conversations?
I had an interesting experience when I was creative director of Digital Kitchen, DK in Chicago, where, like DK worked on a lot of different kinds of jobs, and we had a certain category of work. We did a lot of experiential work before I was there, and that kind of I wouldn't say that it went away, but it was diminished. And I had this experience where a client came in and they asked us, hey, for 20 grand, could you evaluate our this hotel lobby and like tell us which LED signs we should use, because we've seen you've done that in the past, right? $20,000 job, maybe a week's long engagement. It was with Warner Brothers, which this is a couple years ago now. It's 4 or 5 years ago. I'm a huge fan of, obviously I'm a nerd. You probably see my background. Like, I love comic books. I love the old Looney Tunes. I love the history of film, how they've always supported directors. They were always like the director-centric, director-first film studio. And they'd show me these designs for this hotel, and I was like, man. Yeah, they asked us because we had built a different hotel in Las Vegas that had similar columns with screens. And I remember asking my partner, who was kind of like a biz dev producer, I'm like, and can I get on the phone and just ask permission to just ask a couple questions about the project? That has nothing to do with the screens. He's like, yeah. He's like, we have a call in an hour or two. He's like, what are you gonna ask? I'm like, just put me on the phone. And I remember asking him, I was like, look, man, like I will convince the people here to give you the $20,000 ask for free if we could meet you in Vegas. They're in LA, we're in Chicago. It's like, could we meet you in LA, or I'm sorry, in Vegas for like an afternoon? We'll get you lunch and like walk you around the hotel to show you what we did for this hotel. Cause I think you guys are missing a complete component of this job, of this Warner Brothers hotel. And they're like, yeah, I just asked for permission. Like, can I ask you why you're doing this? And long story short, I basically turned it from like a week-long $20,000 engagement to a 3-year, $3 million plus job where we did like 90 minutes of feature-length animation for all these crazy weird screens, right? And it only happened because I did not accept the initial ask as the full potential of the job. And I had no place to do it. I was just a creative director, right? Like, I wasn't the account person, whatever, but my producer was like, yeah, go for it. And I asked, we had no idea what it would turn into. And that turned into like 3 or 4 years of me and this producer. Basically every job that would come in, it would get sent to us, and we would kind of like sniff around and evaluate if there was something bigger behind it or underneath it, right? And it's not every single job. But I guess what I took from this is like, my theory, this sounds like a sales, like I'm going to sell you a book or a PDF or something, but there's truth behind it, right? Like, I don't pitch projects, right? Like, when a job comes in and I get an RFP or people ask, I'm always looking for like at least the problem underneath the surface that I can say like, well, we can do this, but what if, or why are you looking for the solution? And then go off of that money kind of conversation, not off of money, but off of like the potential. Like, what is the problem that you guys are trying to solve? I would actually say, I don't think this is what you should solve. And if you need to make a 30-second video, we're actually not even the best studio. I have a friend who has a studio that would be perfect for you. But if you want to go further than that, you want to go into like the entire campaign, or there's an actual like real world component to this, like, I'd love to talk to you more about that. And you run the risk of maybe losing that short job, but you lay the groundwork and you lay the seeds for a relationship, right? Like all that stuff we talked about artists. I'm always trying to build a relationship with clients by asking those questions of like, maybe there's something bigger here that you might actually need what we do that isn't just our hands-on keyboards. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I try to avoid pitching projects. I at least try to pitch a problem. And more often than not, what I'm trying to do is pitch a person. And again, I know it sounds like 3 Ps. It sounds like a sales trick. But there's truth behind that. Because if you can actually find what the person needs versus like what they said they want from you, that ends up changing the entire like potential for almost every single job that you run into. From like the small scale, like I got $2,000 and I need a thing to run for pre-roll on YouTube, to like something that could turn into millions of dollars of work. I've seen it happen multiple times. It doesn't always do it, but there's been times where I've done that and they're like, yeah, not interested. And then a year later they come back and they're like, what was that thing you were talking about? Could we pay for you to run like a workshop to talk to my boss's boss about that? So you never know when it's going to come back, but that's my approach to like dealing with budgets. I always look for more, I guess, is the short version.
No, I love that. I know you mentioned you're like, hey, I don't feel like I answered the question really, but you did. I think you actually flipped the question totally, because I think it's, I think you're right. I think it oftentimes when that, at least from my perspective, when the budget comes up, it's typically because it's just, we're only made it to the what part of the process. We're not really at that why of like, why are you even doing this in the first place? Yeah. Really, what are you trying to achieve? And then how can we make it work? I think it was already Chew put out a video discussing how it's like buying a home. You don't just go in and buy it. You have to like walk in and say, here's my budget. But then you're like, okay, but what are you really looking for? What are you trying to do? What district are you trying to be in? Things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is super interesting. I gotta ask a question.
Go for it. I'm excited to see what it's gonna be.
All right, cool. Odd or not? I got it.
Oh yeah.
Where did the dad come from?
I don't even know, man. Like there were so many Ryan Summers when I was looking for like a URL, like a .com URL. And I got like ryansummers.net, but I was like, man, it was just like when I felt like social media might have been starting. I couldn't get my name. And I think I was probably, I draw comic books all the time. I had done like a whole bunch of comic books when I was in high school and like college. And I think it was the name of like a location. I was doing a comic book about like a grocery store in outer space, like on an asteroid. I think it was called Odd or Not was the name of it. I think that's like where it came from. And I was like, I was just like, I will say, like, I have an Evernote full of names, like probably like 5,000, like lots and lots of like names for characters or names for like podcasts or names for stuff. Like when I worked at Imaginary Forces, I was kind of like the name person. Like anytime somebody was like, oh, we're making this movie, but we can't name it this. Do you guys have any ideas for names? Like I remember I was on a phone call with Michael Bay once. And they're like, we can't use this name. Like the dinosaurs are stupid. I can't believe we have to make a robot dinosaur movie. He's like, do you guys got any names for like a Transformers movie about dinosaurs? And I literally was like, I was very like junior at that point, but I was in the room for the call and I was like, tell him yes. And I literally like, they're like, go home and write, like, give us some names. And I came back with like 250 names like the next morning and they got sent to Michael Bay. And it was, I think Transformers Age of Extinction was the one that I came up with the name for. I literally like got nothing for it. And I was literally told like, yeah, you didn't come up with the name, even though I have the email that says I came up with the name. So I love coming up with names. Odd or Not literally means nothing. It's just like, it's fun to say, I think, like say it out loud. And then I'm a really big fan. I was a huge pro wrestling fan, but there was this specific wrestler. He was a wrestler in Japan and he came to America. And I remember it was like the first time I ever went to a show. I saw this guy as this gigantic mountain of a person. And that's my avatar. My brother and I remember we were rooting for this guy who was supposed to be like the Darth Vader of like this wrestling league. And we were little. I was probably 10 or 12 and my brother was like 4 years younger than me. We were standing in our chairs cheering for the guy. The whole crowd was like booing or scared of him. I remember he came out and he was supposed to try to scare the crowd. And I remember seeing him smile. He saw me and my little brother like going bonkers and like he called for us to come up to the metal fence and like he's screaming in our face and we're like cheering for him like awesome. and it was so stuck in my brain and like I always was a huge fan of the guy and he was like the hardest working person and he just had this like larger than life personality. So more than the name, I feel like that icon is probably like, I don't have a brand, but if I did, people would recognize this guy Vader's like the icon of him. And Odd or Not just kind of like I don't know what, it's a silly thing that I thought would sound better than Ryan Summers 778934 on Twitter. So I just went with it.
That's fair. That's fair. It wouldn't make a good RuneScape name, so that's fair.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it fits somewhere. I'm sure it's there's something in the back of my head that made me think of it, but I don't know what it is.
Was it the Guerrilla Wrestling League?
This was this guy Vader started off in a league called New Japan Pro Wrestling, and then he came across to WCW, which was like the I used to live in New Orleans when I was a kid. It was like the southern version of WWF back in the day. And he just tore up WCW. There was like a year where like you couldn't. He was like Darth Vader. Like you couldn't beat him. You couldn't touch him. He beat up everybody. And he was like this guy. He's like 400 pounds. He's a former football player, but he would do moonsaults, like a backflip off the top rope, and like it was just like it didn't make sense. Like you saw him on TV, and you're like, how is it? This looks like a cartoon character. He can't be real. So then it just made this huge impression. I mean, when we saw him in real life, we're like, this dude's the coolest person in the world. So
that is sick. In indie wrestling, even this lower league wrestling, is just so entertaining to watch. It's just it's crazy, man. Like I don't know. It's like you can watch like real, like not. I almost said real wrestling. It's not
the majors. I get it.
Yeah. You watch major wrestling and it's like, oh, they got to apply. They go out. They stand around for like 20 minutes holding their arms up. It's cool. It's fun to watch. And then like you'll see like YouTube videos of like minor leagues and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, even local stuff, and you're just like, I mean, it's just like they're throwing chairs at each other, like legit, and you're like, oh, okay, cool. So we're really doing it.
Oh man, I didn't know we were gonna talk about this, but dude, like there was a world. I spent more time around indie wrestling than I should ever admit out loud. But me and my brother would like, I'm from Chicago, so like if you wanted to see a concert or if you wanted to see indie wrestling, that was a great place because it was like the hub. And then like if you saw a show that you liked, whether it was a band or wrestling, if you saw them on Friday, you could drive to one of 8 other cities, drive to Milwaukee, down to St. Louis, go to Detroit, go to Grand Rapids, and you'd go and basically tour with them over the weekend. Go Friday, go Saturday, go Sunday, and I definitely, I don't talk about it very much, but there's a generation or class of wrestlers that I would go like I used to talk to CM Punk on AOL till like 4 a.m. about UFC. Back
That's
when
cool.
he was working at like IWA Mid South was the league we were always in. And I used to drive guys, like we would meet up. Man, I don't even know how much I can talk about. Like we used to meet up at like, there were wrestlers who were trainers that had training schools, and we would drive people from like the Chicago area over to the training school, pick up more people, and do like a caravan to New York if they were doing like a New York show, and make sure that like guys got into their hotel rooms, that everybody got back home in one piece. And man, like I used to, it was so much fun to see the inside, but not have to live that life or take the damage. But like guys like Samoa Joe, there's a guy, Claudio Castagnoli, who I forgot what his WWF name was. But that whole generation, like it was so fulfilling. Maybe this is another reason why I love being fans of animators and motion designers as they're coming up. Just watching that, like these people who literally were like jeopardizing their health and also made no money, like just out of pure love for the performance, like the doing it, and they couldn't explain it, but they just obsessed with it. I mean, we used to stay up until like 2 a.m. watching tapes of like wrestling shows from Japan and Mexico and Europe, and I would watch these guys like talk to each other, and like they'd get in the ring and practice and figure out, you know, whole sequences of stuff because they're influenced by what they saw, and then they want to go and perform it for people who had never seen it. And then like the only thing I can compare it to is like if you were around when the Beatles were coming up and they were playing shows, and like Eric Clapton would come on stage, and then Jimi Hendrix would be off to the side and like, screw that guy, yeah, I can play better. And then the next night he'd go up and he'd play a Clapton song, and then Clapton would hear about it. Like that whole call and response of like the music in the late 60s and early 70s. I was just very, very lucky to be in just a wrestling nerd and be in the middle when like all these people who should have never made it to the top, like there were days, man, where like I just was so happy after like a WrestleMania and like CM Punk wins the title. I was like, man, I was there when that dude literally would do hour-long matches for 7 of us, because we went to some place in Kentucky, they put up a steel cage and 7 people showed up, and he's like, you 7 people paid, so I'm gonna do an hour-long match against, you know, Chris Hero, and one of the best matches you ever seen in your life. And there were 7 of us that saw it. Like I was there when like I was doing it for like literally nothing, and then 4 years later he's in front of 50,000 people winning the title. Like I was so lucky to see it, and I feel like maybe that's why I do these open office hours and like love seeing people and helping, like, because there's a certain amount of that same kind of like, you do it for the love and you don't know where the payoff's going to be, but you have this dream or a goal, and if there's any way you like, once you've done a little bit of it, if there's any way you can help someone else, and there's honestly legitimately nothing better than helping somebody else get closer. It's so much more like fun to do it yourself, and I've been very lucky in this industry to do some cool things, but man, like helping other people make it to where they couldn't think that they could get, like there's literally nothing better than that. So that's why I loved it, like you calling and asking about this stuff. It's so much fun to be able to like talk about it and see how you can help people kind of make it the next step. So I did not think we were going to talk about wrestling today, but thank you. That was a lot of fun.
Hey, you got it. I don't know. I always say there's theater and then there's wrestling. And I think immediately people are like, negative connotation, right? It's wrestling. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Wrestling is like the next level of theater. Like it is like, you want a good show? You want like a rock star physical? Wrestling.
Yeah. It's the perfect thing where it's like, it's sports, it's live, it's theater. Everyone is in on it. Like that has been the coolest change is, you know, I grew up in the South where people thought it was real, right? That whole, like, it was real to me, like meme, because they wanted to believe it. And now, like, people know it's not, I would say it is real. People are getting hurt. People are putting so much thought into it. It is real, but it's not like when you go to watch a movie, you don't get upset because the movie's not real. You know the movie's not real. That's part of the amazing part of it is like, you can get this amazing story or this amazing this transfer of emotion because you're physically watching somebody do something at a high level that if it was real, you wouldn't get. Yeah, like I'm a huge fan of it, man. Like I think my love of animation came from watching wrestling at an early age. My love of storytelling, like when you actually see how this stuff, I'm sorry I keep on going on this, but there's a post recently on Twitter that I think blew people's mind. Like WWF won't put the video out. They won't put it like on like any somehow somebody got a hold of it and they posted it on Twitter, and so many people who hate that stuff were saying like, I had no idea this is what it was. And it literally is like, you can hear, it's a 4-way match, right? So it's already crazy. There's 4 people fighting each other, and you can hear the 4 wrestlers calling the match in the ring and making adjustments on the fly based on the way the crowd is reacting, but they still have a finish point They know what the finish is going to be. This person has to go over this person, right? But they're literally making up the story based on, oh shit, the crowd is reacting to Punk because he actually twisted his ankle and he physically can barely move. And Punk is like, cool, hit me again, but make it a good one. And then he's like, okay, and you can, because it's such a rare moment that unless you were there, you wouldn't be able to know it, like sitting ringside. And I see so many people are like, why don't they actually have a version of stream where I can hear them calling it? Because if I knew that, I would love to see how they put these things together. I'm like, you finally got it. You finally got the magic behind this is the thought and the care and the attentiveness to the crowd's demands, adjusting on the fly. There's nothing like that. There's literally, and then these people are also basically highly trained stuntmen who just do things that normal people would never be able to do. So yeah, wrestling. There's the TED Talk. I had no idea this is going to happen, but I don't watch it as much now, but I do check in every once in a while with the people that I kind of came up with and see how they're doing and see what's going on.
Who could say that you talked to CM Punk on AOL, right? Like,
we used to talk about like finishes in New Japan. I remember when he was talking about using he didn't have a submission finisher. And I remember we were all talking about like, I should use the STF, should I use the Anaconda Vice? What should I like? Could I make I've been watching, he had studied MMA for a long time. He was trying to find ways that he could create something that was believable, but also wouldn't hurt someone. But it could be like on the par with the what is it? The TK. What does he call it? His finisher where he has somebody over his shoulders and he drops him on their knee. He's like, I need something like that can come out of the blue, but as a submission finisher to kind of like go the next level. And we would stay up all night being like, oh, trying to omoplata. But when you do like all this, like we throw out MMA ideas, and then other people would be like, no, you got to see this finish from this New Japan match from like 1992.
Dude, you're making history. You were literally like, this guy's coaching away.
we're just shooting, just shooting around. Like, what could it be? Because it was like, like if you've seen the same, 3 people for 4 years at like VFW halls and, like high school gyms, and you watch somebody literally bleed out and like try to do this stuff, like I can't say that I hang out with them now or talk to them, but there was a time where it was like, there's just a big group of us like, yeah, this would be cool to do it for this show, or like, it was fun. It was a fun time to see the insides of how it all worked. I will say it made watching the movie The Wrestler extremely difficult because that hit so close to home and so hard. Like some of the actual people I knew, but like, man, what a rough industry that hopefully is getting better now.
I have not seen that movie actually. It's on.
Oh, dude. Right? The Wrestler, yeah, the Darren Aronofsky movie, man, like with Mickey Rourke, like it is so good and it is so close to and hits home in like the real life difficulties and the dreams, like what the people who actually make it, like what they experience. It's a must watch. It's one of the best movies ever.
It's on my watch list now, man.
Awesome,
I'm gonna watch the first episode of Dan to Dan first.
Oh, dude! Oh my God! Don't even. Best thing.
No, we're here. We've got time. We're here. We're good,
dude. Dude, like literally. I mean, I've only seen one episode, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. There's definitely a couple of scenes that I was like, I don't know if they should have done that scene that way, but it pays off really well. Like it is. There's a small handful of things that stick with me, like the old school Warner Brothers cartoons, Scott Pilgrim, Fooly Cooley, Jurassic Park, Never Before Christmas, Toy Story. And I'm always searching for like, what's the next thing that hits me the way Fooly Cooley hit me at just the right time, Evangelion. And man, like I have not seen anything since FLCL that has been one episode. There's only one episode on Netflix right now, but like that episode is one of the most perfect like pilot episodes of anything I've ever seen. Animated, live action, TV. Like I would, if you're an animator, I would strongly encourage people to check it out. Dan to Dan. It's like awesome opening titles and just a perfect. It's like if you took Fooly Cooley and X-Files and put it together. It's just like the perfect setup for like who knows how many seasons of stuff. It's so good.
My watch tonight. Let's find out.
Nice. Do it. Yeah, it's very good. I don't think it'll steer you wrong.
I really appreciate you taking time to meet with me today. This was an awesome conversation. And it was good to finally meet you. I feel like I learned a lot. So this is nice.
Dude, that was one of the crazy things at Camp MoGraph was that I felt like the first 2 days I was there, I was just reconnecting with people I'd already met. But then on Saturday morning, I'm like, I think I'm going to spend the whole day sitting down next to people who I don't recognize. I don't know their names. Because I had only been to the very first one, which is 5 years before that. And it was a lot more people, right? It was like 200 people versus like 50. But I was like, man, the industry has exploded in 5 years. The amount of people who just like list motion design as their job or their vocation or their industry, like it's exciting. But you also forget like there's so many people that need to get lifted up or need to get brought on board or like be exposed to these kinds of conversations. So, dude, I say thanks to you just for like bringing me in. I did not think I was going to talk about Dan to Dan or CM Punk. So it's a weird mix of all the things that make me who I am and why I'm excited about motion design, because we do, like, you could be super into wrestling and bring, I look at Fraser Davidson in Cub Studios, and he has tons of wrestling posts all the time about using a 3D printer and then like animating, you know, like joysticks and sliders stuff, where it's like, yeah, all those weird, that's why I always say obsessions, all those interests and obsessions, they're all vital and necessary and needed in motion design, because something from that is going to affect something you do. So I appreciate it. I haven't had a chance to talk about that stuff in a long time, so thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm glad those topics came up, and yeah, it's interesting because you're right. Just those unique experiences, things like even I feel like even rap and hip hop are so shaped by anime. Just you know, Dragon Ball Z and stuff like that too. It's just like, cool. It didn't come. I don't know. I listen to music. I hear songs. I hear references. I'll go to Genius and look at what the lyrics mean. Things like that. It's just interesting to even. It's everywhere. My point is, we're all fun, unique, awesome people.
We need more discussions of that stuff, because it, like you said something, I think, to put a button on and end this. You said something about like, oh, you know, we always just, you know, some people just talk about what. I think there is a epidemic in our industry of clients telling us what to do. We all argue about how to make it because there's so many tools, and that's the easy thing to make a YouTube video about. That's the easy thing to sell a class about. But the thing that's the most important to our industry, staying in the position it's in, and not just be like people who are told off a menu what to do, is that we don't ask or talk about the why enough. And that's what I've loved about this conversation. It's like, why do you have that goofy name? Like, why did you do that? Like, I would love to hear more people talking about why they've chosen what they've chosen, and even more so, hear more people ask their clients, like I was saying about that Warner Brothers thing. Ask your client why this is what they want. That is a totally fair challenge, a totally fair question for you to ask. And if you get used to doing it enough and have enough confidence, it will change the way your clients look at you. But we have to start doing it with ourselves first. And then I think once you build that as a practice, as like a skill, man, I really believe like that can change. And just being able to be part of these kinds of conversations where we ask that of each other, that's the first step to being comfortable to doing it. So I think for me, that's the end of like the conversation, is like, what is important, how you do it's important, but why is like, there's a like magic in that.
All right, everybody, that was Ryan Summers. Again, a fantastic creative director with over a decade of experience directing. So make sure to check him out on X at Otternaud, LinkedIn as well at Mr. Ryan Summers. And check out Spillt. Check that out. They got some cool work going on over there. Awesome. Ryan, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today.
Oh, man, thank you so much. Anytime I can talk about the why behind projects, or why we do this stuff in the first place, and not just like how we make it, it's always a great time. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.